Hey everyone, welcome to a talk about decision making, behavior economics, intuition versus logic, and much more. I'm so happy to see you here. Welcome to Invincible Innovation Live Show. I'm Mazor, Kario, product innovation and value creation expert, and I'll be your host. And today I have a very special guest, Alex. Hi, Alex.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Alex Shilman, psychologist and behavioral economics expert. Yeah, so happy to see you here. We're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you're so invited to join the discussion and ask questions. And now we can start. So, all that subject of decision making is, it seems like so complex and so many things related to that. So, what do we know about studies of leadership from, or maybe from pilots or Olympic winners about decision making?
That's a broad question,
Hmm.
rightly, because there are many different areas and topics where it becomes very important to understand decision making. But to try to make a long story short, it seems like we have two basic ways of making decisions: the fast one, the quick one, the intuitive one, which relies on experience mainly and instincts, and the logic one, the more rule-based decision making, and they don't interact between them, not only short-term basis. So that's the main idea.
Yeah. And do you think that there are cases that it's much better to just take the decision and go on and not think about it anymore? And there are cases that you need just to really think it thoroughly, logically, and really do the longer process, or it's not related to the use case?
So let me tell you a very short story about it. Just 2 weeks ago, one of my clients called and he was wondering, should he go with a specific investment? He was considering a specific investment. He wasn't sure that that's the right thing for him now. It wasn't the exact specialty he used to invest in. And by the end of the day, the decision was made not because it's the best, decision from the financial standpoint or from the investment standpoint, but we figured out that he will regret so much if he want to go for it, that that's the right decision for him. So sometimes the right decision isn't the economic right decision. It's more about how you're going to feel about it. So this is a very important aspect of decisions which people usually dismiss.
It seems like like it's about the intuition and your gut feeling that is less, you cannot explain it in numbers, right? Like, I have this feeling that I will regret it, so could you show the numbers for it? Right.
All
On the other
right,
side,
right,
there are numbers, and you could just take the numbers and try to figure out what would be the right financial decision. And I
right.
think that in most cases in life, when we go through life, we're doing things based on our experience intuitively, right? But there are cases we're doing it and we don't even notice we're doing it. And that's the things that it doesn't look like a decision at all. The fact that I went to the supermarket and I bought this or not that, right? But all our life is going through these like small decisions,
Right,
right?
like about 95% of our life decisions, which is, by the way, 30,000 decisions every day. That's a
Wow.
crazy number, right?
Wow.
So 95% of them are made automatically by our internal autopilot. And let me give you just a metaphor for our autopilot. When the Nobel Committee called Richard Thaler the Nobel Prize laureate for 2017, I think. So they were calling from Europe to United States, so that they wake them up actually, and they announced him as a winner and asked him what he would like to say for tomorrow's newspapers. What's the one-liner about our intuitive way of making decisions? So he thought for a few seconds and he said, imagine that your client or your partner or yourself is Homer Simpson, and just try to design a world which is safe for Homer Simpson. And that's a great metaphor, not because Homer Simpson is like, a damn, I don't know, mediocre decision maker, because our
Yeah.
autopilot is pretty much similar to Homer Simpson. And this is 95% of our life. So
Yeah.
what you should try to do is to outline the important decisions or the important repeated decisions, and there to construct a good decision-making process.
But we're talking about things that you could perceive and maybe think forward and think about them, right? Because I can think forward and see what I'm going to do in the next week or so. But what happens with surprises, things that you never thought about? And we called the episode decision making while crisis, right? So you cannot
Right.
really think about it in advance. So what happens there?
That's a tough question because sometimes we have to decide on the go, and it never be the optimal decision. But you can create routines of how you make your decisions. You can take a step back just to make sure that we're considering all the variables in the decision. You can wait one day before you make the decision. For instance, that works the best in shopping. People ask how they can try to get rid of their bad habits in spending money, and the best advice would be just wait one day, because tomorrow you would like another thing. You would love to have another digital, I don't know, newcomer. So there are
Mhm.
some routines which is, by the way, agnostic to the specific decision. It doesn't matter if it's to get married with someone or just to buy, small size coffee or big size coffee. The routine is the same. So
Yeah.
just you can adapt some routines, especially as a manager, because you affect many other decision makers, which will help you even ongoing, on the go.
Yeah. And there are people who are really good in making decisions, and there are people who takes lots of time in order to do so. I have a very good friend, and she
Oh,
always, when she goes to shopping, she always goes and she finds what she wants, and she tells the person in the shop, just keep it for me. I'm going to go all through the mall, and then I decide. She never takes it because it takes so much energy for her to just to decide to really buy it. And it seems
yeah,
that there are people who are just they're making decisions not only related to shopping, of course, and it's
right.
easy for them.
But
So
there
if
is a
it,
name. There is a name
yeah,
for it. Sorry for interrupting you. They are
yeah,
called maximizers, those who try to find the best optimal option. So this one type of people, and it's not bad
hmm,
or good, it's just type of decision making, right?
hmm,
And there are the rest of us who just grab the first good enough option, and that's fine. So it's just different types of decision making, and in some cases it's better to be maximizer, in some cases it's better to be not. It's just type of character.
but what in what cases is it better to go and check and think about it again and again and again? Like because it takes a long time in order to make all these decisions, right? And sometimes you miss some of the
Exhausting.
decisions.
It's exhausting for her and for her environment and friends.
Sure.
But when you decide about your pension savings, right, or about, I don't know, buying apartment or buying a stock of specific company or moving from one company to another company, you want that friend to be with you in the room and to brainstorm with her all the pros and cons. Because again, it's just a trade. Some of us it's easier for them, and some of us it's harder for them. So you should take advice from such a friend. That's a very valuable friend.
Yeah. But when you're going to shopping in the mall, you should take into consideration it takes much longer.
Yeah, but you can help her. You can help her by limiting the variety. Okay, we're not looking at any passable dress. Apologize for the exam.
It's okay.
Yes, example which is a little bit archaic. We
Yeah.
look only for red dresses. So now
Yeah.
let's find the best red dress. And that's much easier than comparing everything in the store, right? So you can
Yeah.
limit, because our we need flexibility, but we don't care what's the limits of the flexibility. So as long as we feel that we have a freedom, that's fine.
And tell me, when we're talking about like dress, no dress, shopping, no shopping, it's really, I have to ask that. Is there any difference between men and women when they do these decisions, when they go through life?
If I tell you, I will have to kill you. No, I'm joking.
But we're online. It will be harder
There
for
are
you right now.
no differences. I mean, there are some tiny differences, but it's nothing compared to the common patterns. So in general, we all Homo sapienses are the same. There are some differences which mainly depends on evolutionary forces. So, for instance, in crisis, like we experienced and we still in the middle of, kind of, women tend to buy more cosmetics. Why? Because the fight over good mate is stronger, is harder. So there are some tiny differences, but in general, it's much easier to approach all of us as the same decision makers.
Yeah. And do we see any changes in the behavior of people right now with the crisis, or in general in crisis? What happens to the decision making or behaviors during
Sure.
crisis?
That's very interesting because there are two almost opposite forces in crisis. On one hand, people tend to narrow their vision to the tunnel vision. So we don't see anything besides whatever we need to sort out now because we're in the crisis. So we may forget to maintain communications with friends or family, or we may to be too much involved in a tiny daily routines and not taking a moment just to breathe for ourselves. But on
Mhm.
the other hand, once we realize that the life is short and one day we won't be here, so people tend to buy more luxury and finally let themselves to do that dream trip that they wanted for years. So for instance, at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, all the Mercedes in Israel went off. There
Yeah.
are no any more Mercedes in Israel in the beginning of the crisis
Yeah.
because all those who wanted Mercedes but didn't let themselves felt the end of the world feeling, and they went to actually buy the car.
Yeah.
So it's almost opposite forces, and you can navigate between them.
Yeah. Regarding cars in Israel, you could say the same for Tesla. We started having Tesla during these like 2 years. And after the crisis ended and people a bit came back to work, you would expect them to have less traffic jams right now in
All right.
Israel. And now we have so much more traffic jams because all of these Mercedes and all of these like all the cars that people bought, it's somebody needs to drive them somewhere. And now
Yeah,
it's like much horrible, much worse than it
that's a
was.
very Israeli thing, because on one hand, we need a car to escape. That's very rooted in our culture. On the other hand, we all want to actually own a house, a piece of land. So we want a piece of land here in Israel, but we need a car to escape if we need it. So
Yeah.
it's a bit rooted in our culture.
Yeah, you're right. Do you think that there is something in Israel that makes us decision make, because we're like a post-traumatic place, more or less, you could say, right? So our decision making is faster, is more gut related, it's more intuitive. It's What does that mean?
It goes to the broader question: is there any differences between cultures and decision making?
Right.
And the short answer is no. The longer answer is yes, but again, it's so small compared to the main power, the main pattern. So only if you fine tune your process, it's worth considering. So if
Hmm.
you only start to think about decision making, it's pretty much the same for all of us. If you worked already for a few years about building the right product or the right process, and now you fine tune your product to specific culture, then you can actually gather a value from thinking about the culture. Having said that, we do have a unique ability to jump from one thing to other thing, and to what we would call to be agile, right? Or to be lean. It became very popular in the recent years. And just because of, as you said, we can't allow ourselves to be too much attached to something, because we may lose it. It's a post-traumatic way of thinking. So it helps in entrepreneurship. It damages other aspects of life, but that's another talk.
Yeah. It surprises me when you say that. I expected that you'll say that there are people who are more maximizer in Europe compared to maybe more entrepreneurial countries like maybe Israel or some parts of the US, because they're, as you said, like moving faster, making decisions, taking more risks is part of decision making, in a fast decision making. And it
So
seems
there
to me,
are.
yeah.
Sorry.
No, it seems to me that there are, but maybe,
There are differences. But if you only start to think about, if you're starting to think about decision making and your process, your products, or your management style, that's gonna be the tier 2 or tier 3 fine tuning, because you have so much to do just with the main patterns of decision making, which is common for all Homo sapienses. That's the social part of social psychology. Those all insights, they are actually psychology, not economics. It's just by coincidence they become known as behavioral economics. That's actually psychology, social psychology, mainly social, a little bit of cognitive psychology and other. And social means that's common for all Homo sapienses. And you may find some differences between cultures, but there is a very, very heavy core which is common.
Yeah. Okay, I have a list of questions, but now one came up to my mind. And I know that there are like some very important books in behavioral economics. And one of them is Nudge, right? And I know that many people heard that as a buzzword. And how would you explain that idea of nudge in your words?
So for Hebrew speakers, it's much easier. Think of nudnik. Think of the Hebrew word nudnik, which there are some people who claim that nudge came from nudnik. So it's a gentle push towards the right decision. That's nudge, which means if the default option in your organization card would be, yes, I want to be a donor, and you have to check in if you don't want to be a donor, that's a nudge towards to be donor decision, which is good decision if you think that's the good thing to do, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if the default decision would be I don't want it, you have to check in if you want to be, that's a push, again, very gentle push, because you still can choose otherwise, right? Towards the other decision, and it make a huge difference. If you check the map and if you read anything about it, you can see that those countries with the default yes are much higher in organization compared to those which is by default no. That's Nudge. Very important book. Not the easiest to read. There are some better.
So what would be the first like 2 or 3 that you would say, if you want to understand behavioral economics, you should read?
You should read one of Dan Ariely's books, and preferably the first one, Predictably Rational. He have written since then another 6 books, but the first one remains the best one. And the second would be Danny Kahneman's book, Think Fast and Slow. Danny is a Nobel Prize laureate of 2002, and he's one of the brightest minds living today. That's a great book.
Okay, so I'll add it to my list. Although I read some of Dan Ariely's, but I don't think it was the first one. So what is your toolbox for critical thinking and better decision making?
It very depends on what area. I mean, because we are so heavily impacted by our environment, I mean, even the temperature of the water I'm drinking now impact my engagement with you. So every
Mm-hmm.
tiny detail in the environment impacts us. So it's very important to focus on a specific environment. So is it, a pilot cockpit or a trader computer or maybe a mobile app of Carpool, an actual real example when we try to convince people to carpool with others, which is very damn hard in Israel, right? So
It
it's
is.
very, very important in what environment you're making your decisions. And then we can construct good toolbox. So let's take one example, for instance.
Let's take the carpool one. And another
Carpool.
reason, other than the fact that you mentioned it's hard in Israel, I could have lots of like reason of my own. But I worked with Waze many, many years ago, and we had this feature of carpooling. And it was one of the features that they wanted to they have it, but they wanted it to be much more. So I'm interested in that.
So let me tell you a real story about
Yeah.
moving
Mm-hmm.
and then to explain it, why it works and how we can replicate it in our daily life. So Movit really wanted people to carpool. They were fighting with Waze and Google over carpool because everyone realized that's going to be the operating system of the self-driving cars, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they invested a lot in trying to convince people to carpool. So there is the most important screen when you actually decide, would you go with someone if you are the one who takes carpool, or would you take someone with you if you the driver?
Yeah.
And product wise thinking, they put it their photos of those who ask you for a ride with some details about them and how far they from your route and how much money you will make, just from taking them with you. But from the decision making point of view, it made sense to take off the photos and just leave the name and the coordinates and the money. And after they try to take off the photos, which is completely nonsense from the product point of view,
Yeah.
they raised by 17% the conversion
Wow.
rate of the carpooling. Why?
Why?
Because it's a difficult decision when you see a face. That's a social decision. So many stereotypes and experiences and thoughts and desires tied to a face, right? What she dressed with, and what color of her skin, and all the rest of features of other people. So it's a very difficult decision, and we just decide not to decide. We postpone the decision. But if
Yeah.
it's just a name and a coordinate and amount of money, it's much easier. So you push the option, and 15 minutes later, you figure out that you actually invited an actual person to your car, but that's later. Now it was an easy decision to make. So that's a
Yeah.
very important point. Make your good decisions easy to make and bad decisions difficult to make. For
Yeah.
instance, in your frigidaire, put, in that height, the healthy stuff, and all the
Yeah.
unhealthy stuff put as high as you possible and as low as possible. So it will be harder for you to actually get it. It
Yeah.
will work. It will work.
Yeah, it's the same as saying like don't leave the knife next to the cake because then you just
Yeah.
flat you cut it more and more. So we have a comment here about the books. David Wasserman says that any Duke has thinking in bets is a good one as well. Do you know
Yeah,
that
and
one?
Duke is a great researcher. If
Thanks,
it's
David.
it's it's a new wave of books. And by the way, every year a new 15 more or less new books about decision making coming out. That's a very
Wow.
hot topic. Yeah, it's a very crowded space. So Annie Duke she's an amazing, and that's a great book. Less a fundamental one, but that's a great, actually great book.
So thanks, David, for his comment, and we always love to hear what you're thinking. So if we're talking about leadership, what is needed from leadership in order to decide better, especially right now?
I think, again, there are many things that you you may outline as the most important, but from my point of view, your tiny actions which create the atmosphere, the culture in the company matters. We have two ways of reacting to the world or interacting with the world: fight, fly, or freeze, which activates when we feel in danger or not safe, and the interactive mode, the more engaging one, the more calm way of interacting with the world, when we feel safe. If you need creativity, if you need engagement, if you need partnership, you want to be as much as possible at the safe area, not at the danger area. And tiny routines and actions of a leader determine what kind of culture would be in the company. So if you smiling, and if you just saying thanks for ordinary things, and if you spread the good news and don't getting too hard about the bad news, all these tiny actions, they sum up to creating a safe culture. And then you're getting creativity, and you're getting cooperation and engagement, and self-drive, and proactivity, and many very crucial and important traits for a business. But it's very easy to ruin it. So one or two better teams, and all of your team will be in fight or fly mode, which is terrible for business. Yeah. That's one of the reasons why young, amazing, cool companies become obsolete once they are acquired by corporates. It's very difficult to maintain such a safe environment or culture once you became, a giant. So that's one of the challenges, crossing the Rubicon of become part of a giant.
Yeah. So I have two questions about it. Like, is it related to a physical situation, the sympathetic or parasympathetic? It's really similar. So that's what I'm saying. So the sympathetic is a state of your body and how you feel, and you could change it with behavior, right?
Right.
So that's the first thing. And the second thing that comes to my mind when you're saying that is that in general, right now, you could say that people are more anxious in general. Like in Israel, is not an example because like our baseline is anxious, and it's even more so. But in general, does it mean that companies are making worse decisions right now because their leaders, their employees, everyone working in there are more anxious?
Yeah. So the first question about the parasympathetic and sympathetic parts, that's exactly the same vertical. And by the way, that's the reason why mediating helps, right? Because you're turning down your active systems, and you're giving a room, you're giving a place or space to more calm processes. So that's exactly the same area. It's not the same vocabulary, but the same area of phenomena. And with regards to an anxiety, let me give you just one amazing example that I have heard from my friend who works in advertisement. In the States, United States, the main way of fighting car accidents, it's just to put a crushed car by the road, right? So it's very common. It's very common. You drive by wherever in the States, and you find out of sudden a crushed car, put it there as a sign, just to remind you how dangerous it is. They tried here in Israel, and it didn't work. And the same about cigarettes. In Europe, now they cover the cigarettes, but before they covered them. So in Europe, you had that terrible photos, right? That which ruin your appetite for days. And here we didn't have it. And they tried here in Israel, and it didn't work. Why? You can't scare anymore. You can't scare us anymore. we are our basis is so high an anxiety level, so we don't care. We have real dangers here. Don't scare me with crashed car, right? So there are differences, and ironically, it makes us better decision makers in the crisis because we get used to. So okay, so that's another danger. Still, it's difficult for everyone, and also for Israelis and those who experience chronic anxiety. But we have a little bit of immune system, if you want, against it. But the general answer is yes. We make, I won't say worse, but less good decisions because we have less attention to actually invest in it because we may act from fight or freeze or fly mode. So if you didn't invest in thinking about your routines or processes, you should now. And if you invested, you may need to invest more because it's more difficult now.
Yeah. No, it's kind of strange. Where is this limit that you're training yourself to overcome or to get used to hard challenges? And when is like, that's my top, and from here I break. I cannot really stand it anymore. Where is this line where it passes as
That's
human being and as a society? That's a good question, right?
That's a very good question. You asked at the beginning, you asked about athletes and Olympic athletes. And the difference between good athlete and great athlete, exactly that spot. Where is my limit when I can give my 300% and not to be broken, right? And that's exactly the difference between them. And by the way, one of the tools in their toolbox to actually maintain it, it's a very certain routine before they perform. So Michael Phelps, for instance, he used to listen to the same music before he jumped to actually swim. And most of the great athletes, you will find routines there which help them to concentrate and to get the right mood for the performance.
So what you're saying, it's when you're talking about sports, it's the mindset that is the main decision maker here. If they will be okay or gold medalist,
Right.
that's the gap, right?
Right. And it's a bit different from our daily life because they rely heavily on their automatic decision making because they're so experienced. They polished every tiny move, right? So it's a bit different. All of us have specific areas where we can call ourselves professionals. It may be your hobby or it may be your professional skill set. There you can rely on automatic decision making and on your intuition and to polish it. And some other areas you need more assistance.
Yeah. I was reminded when we talk about Israelis and decision making that when we talked about why Israelis has so many entrepreneurs and founders in Israel and startups in general, and I heard a story about the PISA test. It's like the third time I tell it, and it's one of my interviewee told me. So many years ago, they had this research, and they gave these tests to kids, and we're not that good in math. So Israel is about like Mexico; it's not that good. But what they did do is they asked them how good they are, how sure you are that you'll be a very successful in this test. And there the Israeli kids came first because they were so sure of themselves. And I think that it relates to the mindset that I'm so sure that I'm good, although I don't have any credentials, right?
That's a great story. There is a classic study from Harvard. It's not a politically correct one, so I apologize. But it was 40 years ago. They didn't know that it's not allowed. They're not allowed to do it. So they try to figure out what's the pattern, what's the common about all those boys who date the most beautiful girls, the most wanted girls. Okay,
Mhm.
and they checked income and cars they drive and how tall they are, any kind of different features, and none of them were correlated to the actual success. And the only one variable which correlated was how many times you're willing to try. and not to give
Yeah.
up.
Right.
So those who just tried more and more and more, in some they had terrible conversion rates, but by the end
Conversion.
of the day, the most desirable dates.
Yeah.
So that's exactly about the same. How you feel, how it's not just about believing in yourself. It's also to be able to contain so many fails. That's not an
Yeah.
easy thing to do, and
Yeah.
and that's also one of our strengths here in Israel.
Yeah. That's what Winston Churchill said. So success is going from failure to failure without losing your enthusiasm. That's what
All
he said.
right.
So it's
And
the
he
same
knew
thing.
thing or two about failure. We
Right.
like to remember the great Churchill of the World War II, and we forget that just the day after they kicked him off from the office, and he remained historian.
Yeah. So I want to ask you one last thing. So, what is the most surprising thing you learned about people after so many years of experience?
Wow. First of all, I'm in love with behavioral economics because people keep surprising me every day. The most surprising thing, I would say, our superpower to get adopted, to adapt. That's an actual superpower. We can adapt to everything and we don't know it. So if you ask someone, how would you feel if you lose an arm, right, in a car accident? People are sure that they're gonna kill themselves. And if you check a year after they actually lost their arm, they're exactly the same person. So we have an amazing and vice versa, right? If you're getting, I don't know, the biggest prize in the lottery, right? My life will change, and year after you're exactly the same person. So our ability to adapt is just nothing less than a superpower, and we should use it. You should believe in it and use it.
Okay, it's been really interesting. So I have another one, although we have like 1 minute. Your
Sure.
number one tip for managers and leaders.
I guess don't be protective, which is very broad. It means to hire people who are smarter than you. It means to be very open about decision making. It means not to be afraid of be transparent. It means many, many different things. But the core of it would be don't be protective, right? Be supportive and ask for support from your team because it's not about you, it's about how you help your team to succeed.
That's really interesting. So thank you, Alex. How could people hear more about you and maybe hear one of your lectures and your work and contact you?
So just type my name in Google, Alex Shilman. You can find my personal site. You can find my two consulting companies, one devoted to high-tech industry and another one for strategic consulting. I write on the marker regularly, less in the past few months, but used to. So just add, search for Alex Shilman. I would love to see your comments, ideas, anything you really want to share.
Yeah, I read some of your articles and you write really well and it's interesting. So
Thank
I,
you.
I recommend it too. And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining us. If you want to hear more about my work, go to invincibleinnovation.com and I'll see you next week with another innovative, insightful talk. See ya.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.